Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest is the acclaimed documentary filmmaker behind award-winning films such as City of Ghosts and Cartel Land. Now, using the experience he gained in the field, director Matthew Heineman is making his first step into narrative filmmaking with a harrowing biopic on the life of war correspondent Marie Colvin. It stars Rosamund Pike as the main character. Let's take a look at the trailer for A Private War.
Foreign Correspondent of the Year, Marie Colvin.
Where did you get that eye patch?
Treasure Island. I need a photographer. Any good?
The best. Can't stop thinking about it.
Once you go crazy, it's not something you get used to. War is not so terrible for governments, for they are not wounded or killed like ordinary people. Our mission is to speak the truth to power. You're prepared to sink your country into civil war. What happened?
They've opened fire on journalists.
If the government catches you, they'll kill you.
I have nightmares every night.
You've seen more war than most soldiers. You have to take it seriously.
I hate being in a war zone. I also feel compelled to see it for myself.
Because you're addicted to it. If you use the sat phone, those drones will know where we are.
We don't have time!
No one in their right mind would do what you do. She needs to get the hell out of there.
We have to go back.
We will die if we go back.
I want people to know your story.
You have a God-given talent for making people stop and care.
Being alive.
I see it, so you don't have to.
If you lose your conviction, what hope do the rest of us have?
Maybe I would have liked a more normal life. Maybe I just don't know how.
Everybody, please welcome Matthew Heineman.
How are you?
Sir, congratulations. Unbelievable work. Your first time out of the gate, kind of. You've been making documentary films for a few years. So, outside of your experience with sort of being in the field, your experience with Syria, what made you confident that you could tell this story, that you could do it justice? Which you do, in my opinion. But what made you think you could do it?
My background is in documentary film. I've been in conflict zones. I've felt that same draw to want to cover stories like this, and that same bizarre feeling of coming back to New York City the next day and sort of living these two different worlds. And so it felt like a very personal film to me. It felt like a film that I just had to make.
You know, one of the things that I was struck by with the movie is we're living in this strange age where this particular government is making the story about the journalists themselves rather than the story that they're covering. And so oftentimes journalists are willing to take the bait, I think, unfortunately. Not all, but some. And this story is one that rides a very fine line where it is clearly about the journalist, but it is so much more about the stories that she's covering and her dedication to those stories. And you see so many instances in the movie where she wants to make it about the stories that she's covering rather than about herself. Was that something that you, as a filmmaker, was on your mind a lot of the time going into this, that you didn't want to make it solely about the bravery of journalists? You wanted to make it about the stories they were covering?
Yeah, I mean, the film is, for me, both an homage to this incredibly beautiful, courageous, complex woman, but also an homage to journalism. I think at a time when journalism is under attack, media is under attack, we're living in a world of sort of, fake news and sound bites. It was so important to explore what journalists actually do and the toll that it takes on them. This film is really, in some ways, sort of a psychological thriller of what pushes somebody like this to go to these places, to go to the most dangerous places on earth, but then also the effects that had on her.
What pushes her so much is not the accolade or the awards or the reward that comes afterwards. It's the ability to tell people's stories who would not necessarily get to have their story told. You know, the scenes in Syria in the film are heartbreaking, and also at the same time, I think the greatest testament to this person and her dedication to the job.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to make, you know, as authentic and real and visceral a film as possible. I wanted you to feel like you're in her shoes, and a big part of that was bringing these war zones alive and telling the stories that she was telling. We shot all the war zones in Jordan, and it was really important to me to actually work with all non-actors as the background cast, so that when she walks into a shelter for women and children in the besieged city of Homs, you know, she's walking into a room full of real Syrian women, and she's speaking to, you know, when she interviews these two women, they're really from Homs. They, you know, they're telling their own real stories and shedding real tears. So it created a really visceral and sort of emotional atmosphere on set.
Did that consist of the scene in the hospital as
Yeah.
well? It's a harrowing, I mean, unbelievable scene. You know, I've seen actual footage of scenes like that before in reality, but you do something different, and I don't exactly know how to describe it, that is almost more effective than the real footage that I've seen in situations like that.
Yeah, I mean, I spent weeks and weeks and weeks finding and interviewing different refugees, again, living in Jordan, from the city of Homs, where she, you know, took her final assignment. And I found a man who was from Homs, whose 2-year-old nephew was shot off his shoulders and died in front of him. And so the trauma and the emotion that he brought into the room was almost unbearable. And at one point, Rosamund Pike, who plays Marie, and did a phenomenal job of transforming into this woman, you know, she walked off set and she's like, you know, I don't know if I can handle this. The lines between, you know, documentary and fiction are so blurred. Is this okay? You know, is this okay what we're doing? And I said to her, look, this is something I deal with on a daily basis in making documentaries, is you have this human instinct to want to give people a hug or to give them space, but your job is to capture those moments, as it was Marie's job to capture those moments. And so it is okay, and, you know, he wouldn't be here if he didn't want his story told. And, you know, I think that's one of the tragedies of the film for me, is that, you know, she died in 2012 covering this story, and that you know, the tragedy has persisted until today. Over 500,000 civilians have been killed. I think she'd be devastated if she were alive today, knowing you know, what's happening in Syria, what's happened to Syria. She'd probably be in Idlib or somewhere else on the ground covering a story. Maybe she might be in Yemen or somewhere else. And I think she'd also be quite sad at the state of journalism today, the fact that journalists are being demonized by you know, by our administration and, you know, countries all around the world. And yeah.
Did you see your job as a filmmaker in making this movie almost the same as when you're a documentary filmmaker? This is going off the conversation that you had with Rosamund in that moment. It sounds like you essentially said, we're kind of doing the same thing. Our job is to tell their stories, whether or not we call it a documentary or not.
Yes and no. I mean, you know, this is a movie. I mean, there's actors and it was a set and things that you know, hundreds of people working on the film. You know, I'm used to being out in the middle of nowhere in Mexico,
Camera and a little microphone on the top.
shooting either by myself or with a tiny crew. Sort of walk on set, which is my first time ever being on a movie set, and have hundreds of people in front of me was, you know, quite a different experience. So yeah, I mean, it was a, you know, in some ways quite similar, you know, other ways quite different. But I think, yes, in a sense, the goal was the same. The goal was to hopefully in some small way get people to stop and to care, which is what Marie tried to do. I think that film storytelling has this ability to bring people together. I think our world is so fractured and so divided. I hope that this film can at least get people to stop for a moment to think about what she cared about, which is shedding light on the only people that lose in these geopolitical conflicts, which are the poor civilians who are caught in the crossfire, and to maybe have a dialogue afterwards.
What was it like that first day that you stepped on set?
It was amazing.
Did you have an easy first day, or did you have a big, difficult first day?
No day was easy on this film. It was a very emotional film to make. Every single day we were moving. It was a hard film to make, but I think everyone really believed in it. I had an amazing cast and crew working on the film, and I just feel very grateful that I was able to tell the story, which I think is quite timely right now.
So when you stepped on set, though, that first day, what were you looking at? Like, were you shooting an interior with her and Stanley Tucci having a conversation, or were they like, no, your first day is we're going to throw you into the fire?
A bit more into the fire, I'd say. We shot all the war zone scenes, all the scenes in Jordan first, and we shot London for London afterwards. And so it was sort of jumped in the deep end right away. After the first take, Rosamund was on her cell phone, and I was like, wow, this is a bit unprofessional. Like, is she like texting her friends, or is this what normally happens on a film set? And she kept, after each take, going back to her cell phone, and I soon realized that she and this happened throughout the entirety of the shoot. She would go and she put her headphones in and she'd watch tape of Marie to make sure that she was getting the physicality right, to make sure she was getting the accent right. It was really remarkable to see her transform into this woman. She doesn't sound at all like her. Marie was this sort of larger-than-life chain smoker from Long Island who had this sort of dark whiskey tone voice, and Rosamund's from London and sounds a bit different and looks a bit different. So
it's a humongous transformation on the part of Rosamund. Did you ever how did you find out that she was listening to interviews? Did someone tell you, or did you walk over and you're like, hey, get off your cell phone, this is rude? And she's like, no, I'm actually working.
I can't remember. I think I might have asked her, what are you doing? But yeah.
So going from making a documentary where you're not necessarily storyboarding anything, you're sort of shooting what's on the ground. Did you find yourself storyboarding this, or did you want to get there and figure out, sort of how you were going to shoot it when you saw the blocking, when you saw how it was going to go? I'd imagine you'd have to storyboard some because there's a fair amount of action in the film.
Yeah, we storyboarded a bit, but not too much. A lesson that I learned very early on in my career. I heard Al Maisel speak once, and he said, if you end up with the story you started with and you weren't listening along the way, which is good advice for life and good advice for filmmaking, something that I've held, close to my heart every step along the way of my documentary career. And I tried to bring that same ethos to this new process. I wanted to leave room for improvisation. I wanted to leave room for happy accidents. I wanted to leave room for the wonders of life to occur. And there's so many examples in the film of that happening. There's a scene where Marie is in Iraq in 2003, and she has this hunch that there's a mass grave, and she follows that and ultimately hires a digger and unearths this mass grave. And it's a very emotional scene in real life, and it was a very emotional scene to shoot. We shot it with Iraqi refugees who are reliving, real trauma from their experiences there. And at the end of this day, the women just started just pounding their chest and doing this chant, and it ended up being this prayer for the dead. And that wasn't planned and that wasn't scripted. And it was just this very beautiful documentary moment. And so, yeah, I tried to bring as much of that.
You as a filmmaker are kind of still searching for those those sort of transcendent moments on a set that don't feel like you planned them.
Absolutely, and there's dozens of them in the film. Yeah.
What was the toughest part about making the movie?
Ooh, the whole thing was tough. I don't know. I think I'm used to, again, being out in the middle of nowhere, following real life characters, and so I think this sort of intersection of art and commerce, which is inherently part of making a narrative film, you're constantly worried about the budget and constantly worried about, if you do one more take, you might not be able to do that scene later in the day, or if you turn the camera this way, you might not be able to get that scene tomorrow. So, you're constantly worried about money and time and logistics, and so that took a little bit of getting used to for me. But that's inherently part of making a narrative film. So
it's the compromise of making a narrative film that you found. I wouldn't necessarily say tough. No filmmaker likes it.
Right. No. Yeah. I mean, even if you're making, Avatar, you're still under the same pressure, just on a different level. But
I do feel like with Avatar, he's not under for some reason. I imagine
he probably had a little bit more leeway than I had.
It's like a hair. How was it working with actors? Directing actors, did you like take an acting class beforehand or do anything to sort of figure out? Because oftentimes people say they speak their own language.
Yeah, I've never gone to film school. I have no formal training. I have no really business doing what I do, I guess. It's all been
sheer confidence you're operating off of.
Either hubris or naivete or some combination of the two, I guess. I don't know. I found it not that difficult. A huge part of the documentaries that I make are based on trust. Trust with your subjects to allow them to be themselves, to break down barriers, and that trust and that rapport is built over months and months and months of spending time with them. And I found that skill is quite transferable to working with actors. You need that trust, you need that intimacy, you need that friendship really to really challenge each other to make the film as good as possible, but also to allow them to feel free to improvise and make mistakes, and I can make mistakes, and an environment in which, again, those happy accidents can occur. And so in that sense, I found it not that different than working documentary.
Now you made City of Ghosts, which I think is the best, maybe, or if not one of the best documentaries about Syria. And your experience there and with that documentary, I think, really informs this film, because when you get to this point of the film where you know where you are and you know what's going to happen and you're in Homs, it feels to me like the movie's not just about Marie Colvin at that point, but also about Syria and her and your dedication to tell the story of the absolute, devastation and tragedy that happened there, and is still, in a lot of ways, happening there. Did it feel that way for you as well, or did you kind of just sort of stick to her and know that story was being told through her?
No. I mean, that was very intentional, and it's an issue that matters a lot to me. Most journalists never want the story to be about themselves, and so it felt wrong to make this and to end this film just about her. She died reporting on the tragedy of Syria, and so it was important for me to highlight that, and to highlight, there's the final shot is an image of her, and then we pull out and see, the devastation of Homs. Sorry if I'm giving away the end of the movie, but and it was important to me to show that obviously she's just one piece of this larger tragedy, and for her it was so important to get people to care. That's what she fought for. That's what she risked her life for time and time again, was to go to these places and to find empathetic connections, to find human stories that would in some way hopefully get people to care about these issues that she cared so deeply about. It's so easy to keep these conflicts at arm's length, and she really found ways again to get people to care.
How did you recreate the homes?
We shot that in a abandoned construction site. This is not a big budget movie, and so we brought in rubble, and we were able to dress the first floor of this construction site, and then all the interiors as well, and then the floors above that first floor are CGI.
It looks incredible, and it looks like so much of the aerial footage that we see of not just Homs but of all over Syria.
Yeah, it was really important to me. I don't think people really fully realize what a devastated city looks like, and so making that feel is horrible as it is in reality was quite important to me.
It's a sinking feeling that you get when you see shots like that, and that shot in particular of just like, oh my God, that's awful. It really registers with that shot. Yeah.
Yeah, and the before we shot the final scene in the movie, I held a moment of silence for Marie and for all the civilians who've been killed in Syria, and it was just a very emotional day. And Paul Conroy, who is her dear friend, and
played by Jamie Dornan in the film. Yeah.
Played by Jamie Dornan, her dear friend and photographer, who went with her to Homs and to many other places. Paul Conroy was a consultant on the film. He was with us every day on set. So it's really emotional to have him there, and he was a huge inspiration, obviously, to Jamie Dornan, but to Roz and to me and to really everyone on set. But after holding this moment of silence, one of our stuntmen and one of our extras, these big burly guys, were bawling, crying, and came up to Paul, and they had recognized him from Homs. They were with him in the media center that we depict. So it was a really, really heightened sense of a sort of, I guess, purpose and emotion on set that we were all doing this for something, hopefully that mattered a bit.
And I imagine you wouldn't have it any other way if you're making a movie like this.
I don't know how else to do it, I guess. That's just, yeah, I guess everything I've done has been instinctual, for better or for worse. But
let's get some questions from our audience. Who's a question? Right here.
Hi. So my question is, it seems like you've done a lot of work in nonfiction areas, so documentary, now moving into this film. Would you say that you have any desire in the future to direct maybe a more fiction-based film, like an action-adventure or any other kind of genres, or do you really want to stick with this area?
Why do you have an action film that you want? No.
Cop comedy?
Yeah. I think for now, sticking with real stories, either in the documentary space or in the narrative space, that's what I'm drawn to. Those are the movies I like to go see. That's what gets my heart pumping, and I feel a huge responsibility to make films and to tell stories, and to every couple of years dive into this new world and explore it. And I feel very privileged to be able to do so. So hopefully I can continue to do so as well.
When you say dive into this new world every couple of years, are you referring to filmmaking, or are you referring to how the world is rapidly changing and becoming new every couple of years?
No, filmmaking.
Oh, okay.
Like I for 2 years lived in the world of Mexican drug cartels and making cartel land. For 2 years I lived in the world of ISIS in a group of activists fighting against ISIS in City of Ghosts. For 2 years, I'm guesstimating 2 years. Lived in the world of Marie Colvin. So I don't know what's next, but I really love, the ability to do that and to explore different aspects of the world that we're living in.
Next question.
Hi. If nothing else, what is the one thing you hope audience members get from watching this film?
That's a good question. I think hopefully what she stood for and what she fought for, which is to give voice to the voiceless, to show the true human cost of war. It's so easy to get bogged down in stats and photos and headlines, and it's so easy to disengage from issues around the world. But I hope that the film, in some senses, continues, as we talked about, it continues what she did, which is, you know, shedding light on the poor civilians who are caught in the crossfire.
Matthew, congratulations. Fantastic movie. It's out in theaters right now. People can see it, right?
It is opening nationwide, yeah.
Opening nationwide.
This weekend.
This weekend. It's in New York and LA starting last weekend, right? And
Yeah.
nationwide this weekend. It's called A Private War. It's incredible. Big round of applause for Matthew Heineman. Let's hear it. Thanks, man.
Thank you.